Okay, so most of us know the story of Adam and Eve, right? The garden, the serpent, the forbidden fruit. It's one of the most famous stories about where sin comes from. But today, we're going to look at a totally different take on it from a theological text called the Divine Principle. It completely reframes the whole event. So, let's dive in.
And this is the question that changes everything. The whole idea here is that if we've misunderstood the most important symbol in the story, then maybe, just maybe, we've misunderstood everything that came after it.
So you've basically got two ways of looking at this. On one hand, you have the literal story we all know, they ate a piece of fruit, and that was that. But on the other hand, there's this symbolic view, which says, hold on, there's a much deeper meaning we need to decode here. And it's the arguments for that second path that we're going to unpack today, straight from the source text.
All right, first up, why even question the story in the first place? Well, this text starts by basically poking a bunch of holes in the idea that a literal piece of fruit caused the downfall of all humanity.
The argument starts with a few key challenges. First, you have to ask yourself, would a loving God really set a death trap for his own children? It seems kind of strange, right? Second, how can the simple act of eating something create a sin that gets passed down for thousands of generations? The text also brings up what Jesus himself said, it's not what goes into your mouth that makes you unclean. And finally, think about it. The punishment was death. For someone to risk that, the temptation must have been way more powerful than just a tasty-looking apple.
So, okay, if it's not a literal story, then what do all these symbols actually mean? This is where we get into the really interesting part, breaking down who or what the trees and the serpent really are, at least according to this theological framework.
In this interpretation, the tree of life isn't a plant. Not at all. It's a symbol for Adam himself, but, Adam having reached his full potential. A perfected man who has totally realized the ideal he was created for. That was his ultimate goal.
And if you follow that logic, well, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil isn't a tree either. It represents Eve, also in her perfected state. So the two most important trees in the garden, they're actually symbols for the two people at the heart of the story, a perfected Adam and a perfected Eve.
Now here's where it gets really wild. The serpent? It wasn't just a snake. According to the text, the serpent is a symbol for a powerful spiritual being, specifically the archangel Lucifer, who was created to be good but ended up falling from grace.
And the justification for this actually comes right out of the original story. I mean, think about it. The serpent could talk. It knew exactly what God's commandment was, and it was able to tempt human beings, who are spiritual beings themselves. The text concludes that the only kind of being that fits that description, besides humans, is an angel.
Okay, so we've redefined the key players. Adam and Eve are the trees, and the serpent is the archangel. With these new meanings, how does the story itself actually change? This brings us to the core argument, a completely new understanding of the fall itself.
To build its case, the text points to this one critical verse in Genesis. Right after the sin, what's the first thing Adam and Eve do? They realize they're naked, and they cover their lower parts. Not their hands, not their mouths, their lower parts.
This leads to a pretty direct question. It's just human nature to hide the part of you that did something wrong, right? If you steal, you hide your hands. If you lie, you might cover your mouth. So if the sin was eating, why would they cover their sexual organs? The argument is that their actions point directly to where the real shame came from. And this is the bombshell conclusion. The forbidden fruit wasn't something they ate. The text claims the fall was actually an illicit sexual relationship. This is the one claim that completely turns the traditional story on its head. And it didn't happen all at once. According to this, it was a two-step process. First came the spiritual fall. This is described as an illicit spiritual and sexual relationship between Eve and the archangel. Then came the physical fall, an untimely physical relationship between Eve and Adam, one that happened before they were spiritually ready for it.
So if we follow this line of thought, what are the consequences? Well, they are absolutely massive and completely different from the traditional story. Let's dig into what this text says happened next. This is a really stark claim. Because the fall is seen as a sexual act involving a fallen archangel, the text says that humanity's entire blood lineage got corrupted right at the very start. And that, it argues, is the true source of what we call original sin.
Now, they don't just pull this idea out of nowhere. The text points to verses in the Bible to back it up, like this one from the Gospel of John, where Jesus looks at a group of people and tells them straight up, "You are of your father the devil."
And from this one original act, the text says that all of humanity inherited 4 basic negative traits. These are all traced back to the archangel's own motivations. He was jealous and didn't see from God's point of view. He left his proper position to chase something he shouldn't have had. He messed up the whole natural order, and then he passed his crime on to others.
So, why does any of this matter? What's the point of reinterpreting the whole story? Well, this final section explains why. From this viewpoint, you absolutely have to get the diagnosis right if you ever want to find the cure. The logic is pretty straightforward here. If the problem isn't just a simple act of disobedience, but something much deeper, something in our very spiritual DNA, so to speak, then you can't just slap a bandage on it. The entire root of sin has to be pulled out and replaced. And that really brings us to the ultimate takeaway. According to the divine principle, we can't ever truly solve the problem of evil until we correctly identify where it came from. So understanding the fall in this symbolic way is presented as the absolutely essential first step toward any real and lasting restoration.
And that's really the question to leave you with. It's pretty powerful to think about, isn't it? It shows how just changing the meaning of one single, foundational story can radically alter an entire worldview, how you see human nature, history, and even our ultimate purpose.